Welcome to Bizarre Podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Bizarre Podcast. On today's episode, which is actually a bit of an unplanned episode to tell you the truth, as the next scheduled episode was going to be haunted pubs in the UK. As I'm researching that, I also put a post on Facebook for anyone to get in touch with me if they had their own personal ghost story that they'd like to tell. And what I was originally going to do with these stories is save them all up for a Halloween episode, but two of the stories I received this week from listeners, I instantly just fell in love with. And I can't sit on them. I want to get them out there to you now, and I want you to hear them for yourself, and hopefully you'll love them just as much as I did. But in the meantime, if you have a ghost story that you would like to share with the podcast and have it played on the Halloween special that I plan on releasing in October, please don't hesitate to contact the show. You can reach me via Facebook or via email. And as always, all my contact information can be found in the show notes for this episode. Strangely enough, both the stories I'm going to be reading out today both came from the UK. The first story was sent in by a lady who listens to the podcast, who contacted me via Facebook, and she wishes to remain unknown. And so, without further ado, I'd like you to pour yourself a drink, turn down the lights, and prepare to be scared. My story begins with the birth of my son. It was the month of June, way back in 1983. Upon my return from hospital, my husband built the baby's cot in our own bedroom and placed it beside the bed so we could be close by in the middle of the night. My 10-year-old daughter slept in a room just down the hallway at the back of the house. Now this house was situated on a council estate, and they were old houses, and I must admit, I always felt a bit uneasy in that house, especially when I was home alone. Money was tight at the time. Only a few rooms had been decorated, and the floorboards on the landing outside our room remained uncarpeted and would creak and moan when stepped on. It's also worth noting that the electricity in the house was controlled from a coin-operated electricity meter that was situated under the staircase in the kitchen. In order to provide electricity to our home, we were required to insert an old 50p piece into the contraption and crank the handle until the 50p disappeared inside the device, and with a pop and a fizz, the electricity would then be circulated around our home. Now, as I mentioned before, I was always a bit uneasy in the house, but to be honest, nothing really happened apart from the occasional bump or bang. The real activity seemed to start with the arrival of our newborn son. On the first night, as we all slept, I was awoken by a strange sound. I glanced at my baby to find him sound asleep. Then I heard it again, this time more distinctive. It was the sound of water. I threw back the covers and went out into the landing, my hand fumbling on the wall for the light switch. All the while, the sound of water sloshing around could be heard coming from the bathroom at the end of the hall. My fingers finally found the switch on the wall, and I flicked on the lights to the landing. The bathroom door was closed, but still the sound of water came from that direction. I was sure it sounded like someone was taking a bath, but this was ludicrous at 3 AM in the morning. I reached out and grasped the door handle, and still the sound of splashing water continued, and as soon as I turned the handle and opened the door, the sound stopped. I turned on the bathroom light to find nothing. The tub was empty, with not a drop of water to be seen. My husband to this day insists it must have been a leak, causing the toilet system to refill with water, which caused a trickling sound. But I know what I heard, and where it came from. The next few nights we slept soundly, apart from the baby's feeding times of course. The next activity began not long after. One night, at approximately 3 AM, like it always seemed to be, I awoke to see the silhouette of a female leaning over the cot looking at my baby. This startled me at first. Then I realised it must be my daughter, who did on occasion sleepwalk. I spoke her name softly, not to startle her, and told her to go back to bed, to which she seemed to respond. She turned slowly and left our bedroom, and proceeded to continue down the hallway in the darkness. I decided to make sure she had made it back safely. I walked down the hall and peered into her room, and there she was, back in her bed, sound asleep. The next night, once again at 3 a.m, I awoke to see the dark silhouette leaning over the cot, looking at my baby. This happened on more than one occasion, and each time she walked out of the room and went back down the hall to her room, and either myself or my husband would go and make sure that she was back in bed. Now this is where the story starts getting strange. About a week later, my daughter asked if she could sleep over at her friend's house. I agreed and jokingly suggested that she better not sleepwalk, to which she just looked at me puzzled. That night myself and my husband sat in the living room watching television, when all of a sudden the electricity switched off and all the lights in the house went off, and the house was left in complete darkness. The electricity meter under the stairs required a 50p piece, but unfortunately we had no coins in the house. My husband managed to find a few candles in the kitchen drawer. He lit them and stood them up in a cup. With the TV not working, we decided to go to bed and use the candles to light the way upstairs. That night, at 3 a.m, I awoke once again to see the dark silhouette of a female leaning over the cot, looking at my baby. For a split second, I completely forgot my daughter was at her friend's house. I went to pull aside the covers when it suddenly dawned on me, and all of a sudden, I was frozen with fear. The shadow of this girl, or whatever it was just peering down into the cot, not moving a muscle. I tried in vain to awake my husband, but he seemed to be in a deep sleep and would not awake. All the while, the thing remained motionless. I tried to speak, but a ball of fear was stuck in my throat, preventing any sound from escaping. Eventually I found my voice and spoke. I asked the silhouette to please leave, please go away, and with that, the dark shadow of this girl stood upright, lingered, then turned and walked towards the door. She then proceeded down the hall towards my daughter's room, and I noticed something I missed before. Not one of the bare wooden floorboards outside of the bedroom made either a creak or a moan as the entity walked upon them. Eventually, when I plucked up the courage to move, I tried in vain to wake my husband, who jumped out of bed instantly, fearing that an intruder was in the house. He tried in vain to flick the light switch on the wall, forgetting that the meter required another 50p piece. He had simply forgotten, and asked for a candle, and he then checked every room in the house, but he found nothing. He eventually came back to bed and insisted it must have all been a bad dream, and he went back to sleep right away. I, on the other hand, had no such luck. No way was I sleeping now, and I lay there all night, looking at the doorway until the candle burned out, and there I sat in darkness, waiting for the morning light to shine through the windows. After that night I never really saw anything again. There was the odd bump and bang, but that's about it. When my son grew older, probably when he was about 9 years old, he started sleepwalking and talking in his sleep. One night I heard him talking in his room. I went in, and sure enough, he had the glass-eyed expression he always had and was talking to an invisible person at the bottom of his bed. And when I asked who he was talking to, he simply said, "The girl." He sleepwalks a lot, but the one time that sticks out in my mind was the time that myself and my husband awoke in the middle of the night to hear a terrified scream coming from downstairs in the darkness of the front room. We discovered our son had walked down in the complete darkness, went into the middle of the living room, and became terrified and gave the most horrific scream I have ever heard. This scream seemed to last forever, as I rushed out of my bedroom, down the landing, and down the stairs, eventually reaching the front room, where he stood in the middle of the room, eyes wide open, still screaming. I found it hard to calm him, but eventually fell back asleep, and of course in the morning, remembered nothing. Now, this last piece of information I'm leaving you with before I end the story is to be taken with a pinch of salt, as I found no evidence to the following. After hearing my story, a few of my neighbours informed me of the death of a young girl in my old house, some 20 years previously. I never knew what to make of this, because since telling my story, I did become the target of ridicule. But there was one thing that completely shocked me when my neighbour's mother-in-law from across the road informed me that she did remember a girl dying in the house. And if she remembers correctly, the girl had drowned in the bathtub. Now, although I can't be 100% certain, I am pretty confident that I hadn't told her the experience I had had with the running water noises that I heard that night that seemed to be coming from the bathroom. We moved from the house in 1994, and my son's sleepwalking seemed to stop, not completely, but definitely a lot less. Since we moved, the house has had many more tenants over the years, and I have never heard any stories of any paranormal activities taking place since, but to be totally honest, I've also never asked. But to this day, I'll never forget that old house, and the dark silhouette of a young girl that liked to visit my baby at 3 AM. Thank you for allowing me to tell my story, and if it's okay with you, I'd rather not give my name. That actually did give me goosebumps. Thank you very much for writing in. It actually reminded me a lot of my house when I was a child. We used to have one of the 50p operated electricity meters under our stairs. I remember many times we used to run out of coins and had to break out the candles. Yeah, I mean, but fortunately for us, we didn't have any dark entities walking around the hallways upstairs, so that was one good thing, I suppose. And if that creeped you out, if you're feeling a little bit scared at the moment, I must warn you, we have got another one coming up, which is equally, in my opinion, as good as the last. And this one was sent in by a gentleman named Christopher, who wanted to take the opportunity to tell his story. So maybe the last story creeped you out a little bit too much and you turned the lights back up. If so, I urge you to pour yourself another drink, relax, collect yourself, turn down the lights, and prepare once more to be scared again. Before I tell you the experiences that occurred after my grandmother's death, let me first tell you a little about the woman and my fond memories from when I was a young boy. Ever since I can remember, going round to my grandmother's house was a thing to do on a Sunday afternoon, or any other day of the week for that matter. I lived with my mother and sister. My father and mother had recently separated, and money was scarce. I remember on many occasions having no food in the house, and my mother having no choice but to make pops for dinner. Pops was a wartime meal that was made when food was low. It consisted of bread, warm milk, and a little sugar. It was an experience, to say the least. So most days, we went to Grandma's to eat. Food was always ready for us when we arrived. I remember that every time we visited and walked into the old house, we could see at least 3 pies she had baked on the table, all with cut-out pastry shapes of birds on top. A steak pie, a meat and potato pie, and my favourite, a warm apple pie, which I could smell as soon as I arrived. The house was old, and it looked old. Old single-frame windows that seemed to let water in when it rained, carpets that had seen better days, and rooms that were just dedicated to clutter and hoarding junk. And for some reason, I was afraid to go upstairs alone, and always asked my mother to accompany me when I needed to go. I remember once I was alone with my grandmother, and she asked me to go to her bedroom to bring her reading glasses. I didn't want to, but I went anyway. As you walked up the stairs, you had to go past the bathroom, which always seemed to be freezing cold, and across from the bathroom stood the spare bedroom. It was a small confined room, with only space for one bed. I'll admit, I was a little scared, and I always imagined seeing someone stood in the room looking at me, although I never did. Further down the hall was my grandmother's room, and next to it, another spare room. As I reached my grandmother's door, my heart pounding, I turned the knob, but the door refused to budge. I stood there in the dark hallway, not wanting to look back towards the spare room, in case this imaginary man I created in my mind was peeking around the doorframe. Eventually, I remembered, to open my grand's bedroom door, you had to give it 3 hard kicks to the bottom corner to make it open, as the wood had become a little warped in the frame. I gave it 3 kicks, bang, 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 and the door flew open, as it always did, with the 3rd kick. I ran in, grabbed the glasses and ran back out. As I shut the door, I heard a noise coming from the room next to me.